he doesn't have this dialogue with his shadow material, like the darker aspects of him. And if you can't consciously acknowledge that, then it's going to come out in dangerous ways. And
Jason, thank you so much for the time to chat with you. I really do appreciate it.
my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Honestly, of course, speaking with Jason Buxton, the writer director of Sharp Corner. Jason, this film is wild. It is so fascinating. Where did it come from?
The inspiration was a short story by Russell Wengerski that I found in a collection of his called Whirl Away, which was shortlisted for the Giller, I believe, in about 2010. And I immediately was drawn to it because it felt like a great high concept for a motion picture, and I wanted to explore obsession. And so this character seemed like a good way in, a good starting off point.
I mean, this is it's funny when you think of obsession. I don't know what picture you get in your mind, but this is a very unique way to look at it. It's dark, it's funny at times, it's genuinely horrifying at times. Um, what was most interesting for you to explore when it came to the obsessiveness of a character like Josh?
Um, you know, I mean, it's obviously a serious subject in many ways, but I just sort of saw something darkly comedic in a character who doesn't really have a relationship with themselves and is just moving through life, not aware of this hidden passion that is unearthed when he ends up being in this situation where he believes he's the first responder, and is a character at midlife who maybe isn't fully aware that he's sleepwalking
Mm,
and is reawakened. It's sort of a twist on the midlife crisis story.
absolutely. And of course, there's, some wild accident scenes in this particular film. Without saying too much, there's certainly some well, I said there's some wild ones that are happening. What was that like for you to film? Because there's so much embedded within these moments, and yet some of them are just off the charts.
Yeah, well, it was tricky on a production level. Some of them took 3 days to shoot. The big one in the middle of the movie, sort of the mid the sort of the midpoint climax where there's a car on fire and he arrives late, and that was a lot of extras, a lot of resetting, emergency vehicles, and just a lot of different setups. And so that, definitely was very challenging to do, but it was fun. Each time we created an accident, to do something different, to give the audiences a different experience, a different type of accident, and just always to always have, on a narrative level, the threat of another accident. You don't know when it's coming. You know it's coming, but you don't know when, you don't know how. And to build that tension and to ratchet up that tension in that way was always part of the fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. There will be scenes where, you'll just hear brake sounds outside and you're never quite sure. And, it was certainly a character like Josh, he's never quite sure either, especially after the way that the first one takes place. And I wondered about in your mind the concept of PTSD in this film. Because I mean, we see Josh is battling this, and you said there's some stuff that's unearthed there, but he's also really dealing with the difficulty of this. Did you do much research into PTSD, or were you just trying to explore it more on a character level?
Just more on a character level. I always felt like the character was opportunistic. Whether or not there's an element of PTSD that's involved in that,
Hmm.
to me, it was always a character who feels ineffectual in life and is presented with an opportunity to have an impact um, and is exploiting that opportunity. I always saw it that way, sort of more of a darker vision. But the question of PTSD comes up a lot. And interestingly, me and Ben never had that conversation. And I'm curious if that informed his performance because it comes up a lot in Q&As at festivals and obviously would be a factor, and obviously the material deals with it in terms of his son. You know, I mean, definitely it's an aspect of this character that perhaps he's not dealing with. But to me, there was a fascination with the misery of others that he was drawn to, which I think relates to maybe his lack of self-esteem. That was more what I was concerned about with exploring that character.
Well, that's interesting you say that because you talk about, fascination with the suffering of others. And there's this scene too, I don't want to say too much, where he goes into a church to a space with people he doesn't know. And there's this really interesting conversation about control and how things happen. And I was wondering, in your mind, as you're writing this out, what do you think it means for us to encounter suffering and in a time or in a world where we never really have control?
Well, I think it's true. I think we do feel like often things are happening too fast and we don't have control over our own destinies. And I think, to speak specifically to that scene, um, there's many different ways to interpret what he's doing there. And I think in some ways maybe he doesn't fully understand because again, he doesn't really understand himself. And there's a danger in a character who doesn't have a introspection or doesn't have the ability to live and examine life. And that's what I was sort of interested in, this being a cautionary tale about a man who's obsessive as a consequence of not really understanding what would make him happy in life. But with that scene in particular, I think in a way he's disconnected from the world and he's wanting to experience the emotions that perhaps will give him permission to go on this journey to to save the victims. And the victim's daughter in that scene, um, in a way, almost gives him permission to continue on this crazy sort of journey of his.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in light of that, one of the lines that comes out early on in the film, which I think is so fascinating, it says that darkness is our friend. I was wondering if you think that's true. Can darkness be our friend? Or what does that mean to you?
Well, it's interesting. It actually didn't mean anything because my daughter at the time was 6 years old, and she was really as soon as she was old enough to realize that life was not everlasting and mortality was a thing, she just couldn't, she developed anxiety. And so those are the kinds of things that
Mm.
we try to tell kids. But I love that it has that sort of potential sort of double entendre and that sort of layer to it. Wasn't intended, but I'll take credit for it.
Fair, fair. I would love to hear your thoughts on Josh himself because I mean, certainly he's the protagonist of the film that we follow. Um, but even so, sometimes I feel like, sometimes when you watch a film, you feel like you understand what's going on within their head. Josh's character plays his cards very close to his vest. You sort of have to figure out what he's thinking based on what he's doing. And I was wondering, in your mind, and maybe these words are too simple of a paintbrush to push with a character like to paint with a character like this, but do you consider Josh as a hero or a villain? Because I know he's thinking about heroism throughout the film.
Well, I think it's similar to Walter White
Hmm.
in a way. I was really fascinated by when I was writing, I came across this book on story and by a British writer, an exec, a former exec at BBC, John York. He wrote a book on uh, on writing for film and television. He talked about the tragedy and the, what he was putting forward is that tragedies, like true tragedies, are a distortion of a good quality. Like character who starts off with a positive trait that just rots, it just distorts. And I was interested in that, in terms of this character. And so I think he starts off with good intentions. What is that expression? The road to hell is paved
with
with
good
good
intentions.
intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit like that. I think it's somebody who um is unaware that he doesn't have this dialogue with his shadow material, like the darker aspects of him. And if you can't consciously acknowledge that, then it's going to come out in dangerous ways. And so I would say he starts off as a good guy, and then goes off on a dark path down a dark road. And
Yeah.
so does that make him a villain? Well, I don't want to give too much away.
Of course. Of course. But yeah, he's certainly on this. I want to call it a journey of self-discovery, but that seems like it's going, that seems like a different way to express it. But it is in a way for him. I think it is.
And it's interesting you bring it up. You mention it in those terms because when I collaborated with our composer, the Irish composer Stephen McCune, I think he brought an element of that. Like the score is a calling. It's calling out like find your destiny. And so in a way, there's a subversive quality to the score that is empathizing and relating to Josh Ben's character in a way that does make it his calling. And he arrives at that calling maybe in not the best way, but there is something about like, is he finding his true path, and is he this person that he ends up? And there was something interesting in my collaboration with the composer where we sort of landed on that quality. And I thought that was brave and risky, and I wanted to take that chance and just really go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And again, it adds to that unique sense of what's the word? The unique sense of, as we said, self-discovery that we see Josh going on throughout the film. It's just not in the way we normally see with a character throughout the film, and it's so well done.
I think.
Um, Jason, honestly, the film is really something special. What do you hope audiences, or do you have any hopes for that audience will take away from Sharp Corner?
Well, I think what I've heard again and again as we've been traveling to different festivals in different countries with this movie is it has a staying power. It sticks in people's minds, and that's the ultimate compliment because if people can't let go of it, or if the piece is not letting go of people, then maybe there's something going on there. That's something that is it's resonating for people, and that's my hope is that it's something that people can talk about, and you know people make art, they tell stories because they want to communicate a certain sort of view on the world, and you hope that that has an impact, and there's a conversation sort of that's happening.
Yeah, this is a haunting piece. Like I like that description of it because when it ends, it leaves you with pause, and that is something that you don't see a lot in a dramatic film like this. Is it just sort of sits with you. So um, honestly, Jason, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much,
Thank
and
you. Taking
wish
the
you the
time.
best.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you too. Okay,
Thanks. Have a great day.
you too.